One of the greatest ways that we can ever fight for freedom is by fostering silence in our life. We have to fight for time to be in silence. Today, the church celebrates a man named Saint Benedict. Benedict was not a great leader in our church of any institution. He was never the Pope. In fact, he was a hermit. If you don't know what a hermit is, hermit comes from the Greek word eremos, which means wilderness. Hermits are those in our church who consecrate their lives to God and then subsequently withdraw from the world and go live out somewhere in the wilderness, wherever that may be, anywhere in the world. They live out away from the world, a radical withdrawal from the world. For what? To live in the silence of solitude with prayer and penance. I love that term, the silence of solitude, right? Solitude means you be alone with somebody. Namely, that other person, when you're in silence, that other person is God himself, right? So a lot of people think it's strange for us to do silent retreats or to spend time in silent prayer, or somehow people have equated it with like Buddhist practices. Well, Buddhism is the exact opposite. Buddhism is trying to eliminate every voice in our life, to find a state of nirvana in which we are alone with ourselves, right? That's not what Christians try to do. We try to be alone in solitude, meaning with another, with God. It's a relationship lived out with God. We are alone with him. We eliminate every other voice in our life. That's what hermits do. That's what we do when we go on retreat. We eliminate every other voice in our life so that we can hear one voice clearly and above all other voices, because he's the one who informs us of true freedom, right? Remember that true freedom, the way that it's lived out is by living under the scope of the one who is true goodness, the one who teaches us to do what we ought. Remember, freedom is the ability, the power to do what we ought. Well, who informs that? But God himself. He is the measure of true goodness. He is goodness itself. And so I love this, that a hermit goes out into the wilderness to be in the silence of solitude, to foster that voice in his life so he can be the most free. Those who live in silence are the most free because they always know with clarity what they ought to do. Notice how he also lives a life of penance. It's radical penance. And why? Remember what penance does. It fights concupiscence in our life. Concupiscence being that desire for the disordered good, right? We don't want disordered goods. That's called sin, right? We want the goods that are ordered for us. So penance trains us to be able to fight against concupiscence so that we can do what we ought. I say all that knowing that this next week, even starting tomorrow, I'm leaving for my annual priestly retreat. Priests are required by canon law to do 5 days of silence every year for this very purpose, for everything that I just told you, so that we can kind of reset. So we can say, how have I been doing? Have I been doing what I ought according to my state in life, according to my priesthood, all the promises that I've made, according to the people that I serve, and what the bishop has asked me to do? And also to hear God's voice clearly, to speak to me during that time and about the future. What is God preparing for me, and how am I going to do that to the best of my ability according to his voice, so I can always be free to do what I ought? Well, I'm going to be alone in silence of solitude with God. I'm also going to have about 25 other brother priests from my diocese with us. So I ask for your prayers this next week. But I also want to announce to you that I'm going to do a fast from media this next week, which means that starting tomorrow, we will not have these daily videos for an entire week. I'm gonna practice what I preach by fasting from social media, by fasting from all types of media. I will be without phone. We are without computer. We are without newspapers. No other voices in our life. Just us alone with the voice of God. Maybe a spiritual reading, a good book, and a journal. Way to jot down the things that the Lord, we perceive the Lord saying. So again, I ask for your prayers. I also challenge you. Right now during this time, it's an unprecedented time. It's also an unprecedented time for us to live a time of silence. So I'm going to challenge you sometime this summer, right? Make plans for it right now. If you don't make plans for it, you're probably not going to do it. But you may not be able to do 5 days of silence like I'm afforded, right? But I ask you to do some time of silence. Maybe you can set aside a day where we can practice this silence. Go and go to the wilderness. Be alone with the Lord. Take a good spiritual read. Take your journal. Be alone with the Lord. Ask him to speak to you. Ask him to reflect with you in solitude about your life. Live silence. You'll experience freedom. See you in a week.